They tied her to the wagon just as the winter sun dipped low, its pale light catching on the frost that clung to the wooden rails and the rope biting into her wrists. And in that moment Clara Whitmore understood how quickly a town could turn a human being into a spectacle, because only an hour earlier she had been standing in the crowded hall of the annual Christmas party, signing her divorce papers with shaking hands, while carols played too loudly and strangers laughed too freely, her tears mistaken for sentimentality instead of heartbreak, no one knowing or caring that the marriage she was ending had been her one attempt at living an ordinary life. No one knowing she had loved her husband enough to give up her name, her wealth, and her inheritance, and now, after rumors spread like wildfire, how she had ruined a good man, how she had shamed herself by leaving him just before Christmas. The town decided she deserved a lesson, an old-fashioned humiliation they claimed would teach her humility, and so they tied her to the wagon meant for hauling hay, planning to parade her through the square before the evening crowd arrived to laugh and point and feel better about their own quiet disappointments. And Clara lowered her head, not because she believed their judgment, but because she was so tired of explaining herself to people who had already decided her worth, remembering how her father once told her that dignity was not something others could give or take. Yet in that cold moment dignity felt very far away, until a voice cut through the murmurs like a handbell in a storm, telling them to stop, and the man who stepped forward was Elias Boone, a quiet carpenter most people barely noticed, a widower who fixed broken chairs and never raised his voice, whose hands were rough from work and whose eyes held a steadiness that made the crowd hesitate. And when the sheriff muttered that it was none of his business, Elias simply said that shame was never a tool for justice, and that if anyone wanted to laugh, they would have to laugh at him too, because he would not let a woman be treated like an animal. And before anyone could stop him, he climbed onto the wagon, untied the ropes with fingers that trembled not from fear but from anger held in check, and draped his coat around Clara's shoulders. And something in that simple act, so ordinary, so human, shifted the air, because laughter dies quickly when confronted with decency, and Clara looked up at him with surprise that broke through her numbness, meeting a kindness she hadn't realized she was starving for, and as he helped her down, she felt the weight of the town's eyes change from cruel anticipation to uneasy silence, the realization dawning that cruelty often depends on consent, and once consent is withdrawn, it looks small and cowardly, and Elias walked her through the square not as a spectacle but as a person, his arms steady at her elbow, while whispers followed them, some apologetic, some defensive, and inside the hall the Christmas lights flickered as if unsure how to respond, and when Clara finally spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, telling them she had signed the divorce papers because love should not survive on obligation, that she had left because staying would have been a lie, and that if they needed a villain to make themselves feel righteous, she refused to play that part. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added that she would be leaving town the next morning, not in disgrace but in gratitude for the lesson she had just learned about the power of one brave soul. And it was only then, as murmurs rose again, that someone recognized her last name and gasped, and the truth rippled outward, that Clara Whitmore was the daughter of a billionaire industrialist whose donations had funded half the state, a woman who could buy the town 10 times over, and the shock was almost comical, faces paling as people recalculated their behavior, but Clara felt no triumph in their sudden politeness, only a deeper sadness at how respect so often followed wealth instead of character, and she turned to Elias, telling him softly that she hadn't needed a rescuer with influence or money, only someone willing to see her as human, and Elias shrugged, embarrassed, saying he had simply done what he hoped someone would do for him if he ever stood alone, and as the night settled and the party resumed in a quieter, humbler key, something intangible had changed, because kindness, once witnessed, demands to be repeated, and a woman brought Clara a warm drink, A man apologized with tears he hadn't known he owed, and even the sheriff removed his hat, and when Clara left town the next morning, she carried no bitterness with her, only the memory of a coat placed gently on her shoulders and a rope untied before laughter could land. And years later, when the town spoke of that winter, they no longer remembered the humiliation they had planned, but the moment they were interrupted by compassion, the night they learned that humanity is not measured by status or secrets, but by the courage to stand up for another, and that sometimes the greatest transformations begin not with grand gestures, but with one person stepping forward and saying simply and firmly, "No more."